go.
Hi, welcome to the Safety Climate Survey webinar. This is the first in the Safety Performance Measurement series. I will be your host today. I'm Andrea Tassioulis, General Manager of Safety Action. Safety Action are your specialists in workplace safety and business risk. We love problem solving and providing practical solutions to your safety problems. Let me explain the administration for the webinar if you're joining us for the first time. The slides for this webinar are attached under in the dashboard under handout, so you can download those and relax and enjoy the webinar without writing everything down. If you have any specific questions during the webinar, you can ask these by typing in the questions panel. We will do our best to answer these. You can also type any problems that you're having if you're having technical difficulties. Now, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Katie Rowe. Katie is a senior consultant with Safety Action. Katie has 10 years professional safety experience and is a certified OHS professional. Katie has assisted many clients conducting safety climate survey interviews and analysing and interpreting the survey results, helping businesses to improve their safety culture. Today, Katie will explain what safety climate surveys are and give you some tips on how to conduct climate surveys for your business. Katie, welcome to the webinar.
Hi, Andrea. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And let's get started. Katie, can you tell us a bit about performance measurement and OHS indicators?
Yes. So like every other aspect of your business, it's important for us to measure our safety performance, and we need to know whether or not the safety activities that we are conducting are making a difference to the business and to our safety performance. So most businesses are very common with using what would be called, sorry, I'm just going to put the first slide on for you. Most businesses are familiar with the common lag indicators, and they're called lag indicators because they happen after an event. So the ones people might be familiar with, LTI, which is your lost time injuries, MTI, a medical treatment injury, TRI, which is your total recordable, which is like an amalgamation of both your lost time and your medical treatment. I've also written there, people often then calculate these into their LTI-FR, so just the frequency rate of those indicators. The benefit of doing the frequency rate is that it allows businesses to do a comparison that's a little bit more accurate over time, but also allows them to do some benchmarking. What we're probably going to look at more today is the lead indicators, which are an attempt to measure safety before we have an incident. So this includes things like our audit scores. So, if you're auditing your safety system, as well as inspections conducted to schedule is a common one. People do a percentage. So did we conduct 80% of our inspections on time this month, or did we only do 50% of our scheduled inspections? Also, our training, probably the best way people measure that is training. Why did that go back? Sorry. Training plan to schedule. So that's when you go, we're going to conduct XYZ training. Did we conduct it in the month we scheduled to conduct it? The next one, TNA, that's your training needs analysis up to date. So people require this training. Have we trained them in that, and is it still in date? So that's another one. Again, you do it by percentage. We have 80% of our staff trained to do their job per what their training requirements are. The next one that I've listed is hazard hazards fixed. This is often a percentage, and we would go, when you have a hazard reported, you then have an action required. So percentages of those done by their scheduled time, or percentages of those hazards fixed within a certain time frame. But the one of most importance to us today is our climate survey responses. And we typically measure these as a percentage of positive responses. So what we're wanting to know is not just did people answer yes or no. We sometimes you word questions so that a no is actually a positive response. So what we're looking to look at today is our safety climate survey responses. So if I'm going to talk about climate surveys, I need to explain what a climate survey is first. What I've just put on the screen for everyone is this is a sample output, so what a climate survey result might look like. And we demonstrate it in red, yellow, and green, just so you get an idea of, well, what was a good response, a bad response, or poor response. So the way we represent it is those are the questions asked on the side. Can I highlight that for people?
I don't think
I
so.
think I
Sorry.
might, yeah, I can just, let me see if this works. Draw, I can highlight them for you. I'll just go away for a minute and then you can hear me. And then what I can do is over here, isn't that working? These are, is it not letting me highlight? Pen. Sorry. Just, there we go. These are the questions we asked. And then when someone gave us something that was under 50%, we would mark it as red, because that means that less than 50% of the people who answered those questions answered positively. Between 50% and 80%, we mark them as yellow. Then above 80%, we mark in green. And that just allows us a very quick visual on what our results look like. So that's telling you about the results, but I don't think I've yet told you what a climate survey is designed for. So I should probably just quickly mention that, I'll turn myself back on. Redo what? There we go. So climate surveys are designed and conducted to discover what people think within your business about how you treat safety, how your safety system works, what they think of your safety system, is it user friendly? So all of those things in regards to your staff's perception about safety, that's what the survey output is designed to tell you.
Thanks, Katie. I really like the sound of these proactive lead indicators. And can you tell me more about how these safety climate surveys are conducted?
So there's a few ways surveys can be conducted. And here we go. If we go to the next slide, which hopefully I can, having a little bit of trouble with the pen.
It's all right. Take your time.
It's not. Here we go. Finally, I got it. So the most common ways that surveys are conducted is either one-on-one, so face-to-face. Go out in the field, or someone from the business will go out and they will have a list of questions that they're going to ask someone. And then they will talk to that person one-on-one. Sometimes they might do it as a group as well. So you might go, one person interviews 3 or 4 people, or in a team meeting. And so you'll ask them the questions and you'll write down their responses. One of the great things about face-to-face interviews is that it allows us an opportunity to get more information. So if we ask someone, are there any serious safety hazards in your workplace? And they go, yes, you go, well, what? can you elaborate? Can you show me? So we can get a lot more detail from someone about why they answered yes or no to a question when we're doing an interview, because it can become a conversation instead of just marking a box and ticking something. Another probably increasingly common way of conducting surveys is by online. The great things about online is you can reach more people. And almost everyone these days has some access to online. And this is particularly good for businesses in remote locations or over a wide expanse, but also international companies. So we have done climate surveys with businesses who have surveyed not just Australia, but New Zealand and America, and they've done so, you can do tens of thousands of employees very easily, very quickly online, which is very, very near impossible to do one-on-one. So huge benefits to doing it online. Another way that's quite common is sort of like a ballot box sort of thing. So you give someone a hard copy survey, you ask them to complete it on their own in private, and they either put it in a ballot box, which all gets collected, or they sneak it in, or they put it in an envelope, which then gets sent straight off. So that's another good way of reaching a lot of people. Then you know who you've distributed the surveys to and when they come back. Some of the downsides come down to people not feeling the surveys are as confidential because they're like, well, do I know who's handling these? Someone else might see my responses. Sometimes that also then links into the hard copy as a group. So that kind of is where businesses we've worked with have done it, where they get their staff down for a team meeting. They explain what the survey process is. They then give everyone a survey, remind them it's confidential. They complete their surveys, put them in an envelope, and then they get sent off, usually to us for processing. Hard copy as a group has the benefit of you being able to say to people that chance to explain the climate survey process to every individual before they do the survey, so they understand what's happening with the survey, why we're doing it. All that confidentiality can be covered. Whereas when you're doing it one-on-one or individually, you don't necessarily have the time to explain the survey process to each person in the same detail. And it's like online, you rely on whatever email you've put out containing the information that it needs to contain, and that everyone's read that information to understand the climate survey process.
Thanks, Katie. And it sounds like, most things we're moving to online methods, but you're telling us that there are certainly some disadvantages of conducting these things online compared to face to face.
Yeah, definitely. And same with the others. There can be benefits. There's pros and cons of every single method, and a business has to just make sure they're choosing a method that works for them and for their staff. Probably is the key thing. Where are your staff located? What method do your staff prefer? If your staff don't like computers, don't like connecting on the internet, an online survey might not be for them. But
Right.
some people also don't like hard copy. So you got to go with what works.
Absolutely. And well, now in determining, the best way to conduct a climate survey, do you think, in your opinion, is it better if it's done in-house by the local safety team or HR team, or what's the benefits of having this surveys conducted by an external firm?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Andrea. So, very much like what method you choose, choosing to do the climate surveys yourself or get an external company like Safety Action to develop and run them for you has pros and cons. So, some of the things with running it internally often comes down to cost factor, and sometimes people have specific things they want in the survey or they want control over that they can have more control over by running it internally than externally. The benefits externally are about confidentiality. We've found a lot of times where, especially when we've done one-on-one surveys, we've got feedback from staff members saying that they were really glad it was done externally, because when they spoke to me, one of the first questions I often get asked is, are you from within the business? Like, but the moment I tell people, no, I'm external, um, I'm the only person who looks at these climate surveys, your name's not on them, people go, oh, well, in that case. So that's kind of a line I've heard a lot when it comes to it being done externally is, well, in that case, let me tell you something I wasn't going to say if this was only done in-house and within the business. So often people feel more open and honest when it's an external person as opposed to internal. And I think part of that is because people believe that an external business has more influence on their own company than what they do. So it might be a little bit about the businesses we've done them in and a bit of a trust and communication. But people do believe that, this report coming from an external business is going to have more weight and more ability to make change in the organization than their individual response itself can do. So that makes them more open externally. The other thing we found when you compare the surveys companies have done internally with the surveys we've run is the technical expertise that to develop survey questions. We've run these with businesses or seen previous ones running businesses where they don't really know what questions to ask and how to word the questions right. And so that's often one of the reasons businesses come to us, is because they want to do surveys. They know the benefits of doing surveys, but they don't know how to do it themselves. Then on top of developing the right survey questions, you also have to think about how do you statistically analyze the results. It's one thing to say we had 5 responses that said yes and 6 responses that said no, but what does that mean and what can we compare it with? And that's something that someone external is able to help with as well.
Katie, what's something that make the factors that determine whether or not your safety climate survey will be successful?
So I guess some of the key things are, one of the biggest things is management support. So not only is this being run by the safety team who wants to find out about safety, if it's led from senior management or coming from higher up in the business, people seem to give it a lot more weight. But not only should it just come from someone in a certain, if you're sending it out as an email, for example, who's the highest up person you can make this, who's the most important person in the business that you can make the email come from. Also, having it promoted by everyone in the management team. So sending out information to let everyone know the survey's happening, but then having the managers asking their staff, have you done it yet? Reminding their staff in the next team meeting, remember, if you haven't done it yet, to do it. It's important. We care about it. And so management support's very, very important. It's probably one of the most important things on getting the most people involved in a survey. But even like some examples of when we've done one-on-one surveys out in the field, we're not always inducted onto a site, so we need to be shown around. And so a manager might take me to an area, and then they're going to go, oh, can you do, this person's here to do an interview, all those introductions are done. They go, then can you pass them on to the next person? So what they do is they introduce me to someone, explain to them that this is important, it's confidential, be honest, and then they move away. So management telling staff, we really want you to do these, gets the staff realizing that these are important and that their feedback is valued. One of the next things for keys to success would be confidentiality. People need to know that what they say doesn't go beyond the survey analysis. People don't want to be identified. They feel more open and honest when they know there's confidentiality in what they say. I already touched on that it's important to make sure your method of survey um, works for your staff, your people, even your type of work. Some businesses have staff who never sit down at a desk. They may not even have their own email address. So doing an online survey can be difficult because you're going to have to find a time for them to come into a room and sit down at a computer and do one. So picking a method that suits your staff and the nature of your business. Kind of linking back to management support is also communication. It's really important to communicate before you do the surveys, during the surveys, and after the surveys. We would say as a minimum before the survey, somewhere around a week before you run the survey, you should be putting out information to your staff that say, we will be running these surveys. And explaining to them why it's important and what the process is going to be. So we're going to run them, they're going to be online. We're going to be running these surveys between this date and that date. Expect someone to come to your site to conduct interviews or something like that. So people know what's coming. And then when it starts, you communicate to people the survey's started, here's the link, or the surveys have started, here's the schedule of when they're going to be where, so that people know exactly what's happening. Important the communication to remind them that they will be given the results as well. And then so during the surveys, so we've told them we're going to do surveys, we've told them surveys have started. Next, we want to tell them during the surveys, we need to tell them surveys are underway, a reminder to do them or be a part of them, and thank you to everyone who's already done them. Sometimes you know how many staff you have and you know how many responses you've already received. So you might be able to go, it's great, we've so far had an 80% response rate, we're only waiting on 20%. This is fantastic. Encourages people. Always be positive. Every bit of communication has to be positive. It has to be telling people that the surveys are important. And then afterwards, we have to communicate the surveys are finished and thank you for your help and thank you for all your responses. It's now going to be X amount of time and then we'll get you some results. And then X amount of time comes, we give people the results. So it's really important that we are communicating before, during, and after, and multiple times before, during, and after. So it's not just communication isn't just a simple thing. It takes a lot of time and a lot of work, but it makes a big difference on people's awareness that we're doing surveys, but also it shows them that we really care about them doing the surveys. Yeah.
Thanks, Katie. That's really important to know that it's, the key parts of the success are not actually the survey itself. It's more those peripheral activities around the survey. So that's really critical for those of us to know. And now, what questions should we ask in the climate survey?
Yeah, I guess that's what most people think makes up an entire survey is the ability, well, what will I ask people? So I'm just going to go to the slides again. I did prepare this slide for you. So you can ask a lot of different questions, and we try to limit our questions to around about 24 questions. Our reasoning for that is that over our trial and error on time, so let's start at the start. Research into climate surveys and developing climate surveys shows that you need to be able to break down your responses into categories. And then we find you need to have at least 3 questions of each category to represent that category accurately. So when you go, you've got 6 categories, 3 questions per each, it rounds up and then you want a few extra questions of different things. So that's about where you need them to be. So what you can see on the screen in the categories is that I've listed the safety action categories. So we break down our questions into peer influence, leadership, working environment, training and skills, operational safety. And when I say operational safety, this includes the safety system and its user friendliness and things like that. And then the last one is communication. And I've done a comparison there of what the Risk Management Institute uses as their categories for climate surveys. And so you'll see they use teamwork, which is very much, when you look at their description of teamwork, it's what we call peer influence. Perception of management is what we call leadership. They do work conditions, we did work environment. So most of theirs are the same as ours. Their differences in theirs is they list job satisfaction, which they describe as people being positive about their work experience. So this includes opportunities available to them, I guess, to get involved and make changes and make differences. So that's kind of what they're doing. So I put that opposite training and skills because I think that links together a little bit. So they've done something a bit different in their categories. Another difference they have is they use organisation commitment to safety. And then their last category was recognition. So you can see it's very common to use 6 categories, and then you break up your questions to fit those categories. So you don't go, oh, I'm going to create a question and slot it into any category. We have a list of quite a lot of questions, and then we cull it down to be 3 from each of those categories. So we might have at Safety Action, we have a sample of questions, and we have about 6 to 10 sample questions for each category. But we can't ask 60 questions of staff because staff will get bored and not treat 60 questions as meaningful. So we have to pick for each of our 6 categories around 3 questions that works for the people that the survey's intended for. And so those questions need to cover those categories, at least 3 from the categories.
Excellent. And that's really, really helpful. And it's good to understand that there is some flexibility when you're designing a questionnaire, so that companies can customize it to their own interests. Although, Katie, from your experience, is there any questions that I should not ask about in a safety climate survey?
Yeah, so there's not a lot you cannot ask. Probably the main thing is the way you word your questions and making sure they're not leading questions. So you can't word a question in a way that people are inclined to answer yes or inclined to answer no. You've got to make sure it's really neutral. Another point is making sure it's relevant to the whole business. So you can't ask a question where you're going, oh, I want this response from, or I want to know about something from a specific site or a specific department. You've got to word that question so it's relevant for the whole business. Otherwise, other people are going to answer the question and be confused and answer negatively, and it's going to weight your data in a way that you don't want it to weight your data. Anything that might break confidentiality. Sometimes questions can indicate a certain group of people or certain individuals. So making sure that your questions remain open, again, relevant to the whole business. And sometimes that also includes what wording you do use. Some businesses might have sensitive topics or issues or words. I know some places don't like the word employee or staff, so we use worker. So you got to just pick what suits the business, and so it requires a little bit of talking and understanding of a business in order to develop surveys for that business. Along the lines of what not to ask. Probably not so much what not to ask, but when you're conducting surveys, just a few other things I would suggest to avoid. We've done climate surveys where they've been a part of a general staff perception survey, and safety was one small aspect of this really big survey. And people were asked over 100 questions, and about 6 of them were related to safety. And so the data you get to analyze for that is, already I said we want to ask 6 categories of questions, and we want at least 3 questions for each in order to get a really good representation of those categories. When you're doing it as part of a general perception survey, you don't have the opportunity to ask as many questions because every other part of your business wants to ask their questions as well. So we get left with this point where you go, well, that's, we don't have enough safety data to work with there. So avoid doing them as a separate safety survey. We have found to get better results, not necessarily more positive results, but more responses, more commentary, more analytical results. Also, just highlighting the language that you use is really important. It has to suit your workforce. But in general, just really plain, simple English, cutting back any complexity or confusions. And sometimes you need to also consider what is the language spoken and read by your staff and whether or not you need to have any translation. Slight detour, but something I did want to talk on was when it comes to questions. I thought I would put in the slides for you. These are the most important questions we ask. So in every survey that we run at Safety Action, we put in these 4 questions. And then we use these data. These are our key questions, critical questions. So earlier on when I showed you the graph of a climate survey, I showed you we go red 50%, under 50%, yellow is 50 to 80%, and green is above 80%. These questions we actually recommend businesses aim for over 90%. And so the questions that we ask this for is, have you been adequately trained to do your job safely? Because we think it's important that at least 90% of people are saying, yes, I have been given the adequate training to do my job. The next one is, does your manager or supervisor display good safety leadership? I love this question because people will answer yes. And so when we're doing one-on-one interviews, this is a good example of where interviews are great, is they say yes. And we go, well, what is it that they do that shows you they care about your safety? And people will go, oh, well, they always make sure that I'm wearing my PPE or that I'm doing jobs correctly. And so comments that we used to think people thought of as negatively, oh, my manager always makes me wear PPE. Sometimes we think that's people viewing safety negatively. But then when we ask them the question, is your manager displaying good safety leadership? And they say, yes, they are, because they're making me wear my PPE. It shows that people actually don't view that as a negative interaction, but as something where the manager is showing that they care. So that's kind of I love that question, because when we do it as interviews, we get a lot more out of people than just a yes, no. The third question is, would you be criticised if you stopped a task that posed an immediate risk? And so this is us just fleshing out, we want 100% of people to say no. I wouldn't be criticised. And then the last one is, the business genuinely committed to workplace safety, is the last one. And so again, businesses really do strive for a 90-95% response rate on that. I think that, makes sense why you would want 95% response rate on that.
Oh, excellent. Thank you, Katie. That's really helpful to understand. If I was to design a survey or have someone else to design a survey, these are all really important things to understand when trying to put input into these question set. Now, look, I have a question at hand that was emailed to us earlier, and I
Yes.
believe prepared an answer for this one. And this was a really good question. How many people should I survey when conducting the safety climate survey?
Yeah, so I did prepare something for you. So when you're preparing a climate survey, you have to look at, well, what's the group of people that you are wanting to get the responses from. So pretty much if you're going, well, we want to represent our business, we go, well, what's our number of employees? If you have less than 50 employees, then we need to interview 50% of those people. If you have greater than 500, you only need to interview 10%. But you can still see that, that's a lot of people to interview. Of course, you want to interview as many possible. But so there's a really good table, and that's a table that came from a book on behavior-based safety that was written in the 90s, but from a statistics point of view, it's still a very relevant table. And this is what we use when we are assessing, have we got enough data in a survey? But then not only that, I thought there was a little bit more to answering that question than just how many people I should survey. I thought it also came down to how many people in a group. When people do surveys, we also break them down by demographics. And so, for example, male, female, manager, worker, employee. And we find that you have to have at least 10 people in one of those demographics in order to be able to represent that demographic. And that kind of shows up in the table as well, is that, if you only have 10 people, it skews the data quite statistically. And so what I've got on the screen there for you, everyone can see on the left, this is the same data represented with only 5 of the responses. And you can see that it's very blocky. And you can see that one person's response is shifting whole blocks of data. And so that's with less than 5 responses. And on the right, you can see the exact same data with 20 responses. So I just randomly selected down to 5, and then there's the full 20. And you can see a great difference. And in the 20 responses, one person isn't shifting huge blocks of the data. And so that's just an example of, so not only do we have to know how many people we're surveying when we're picking our demographics, we have to make sure that we're picking demographics with at least 10 people in them, and that when we are doing the surveys, at least 10 people are represented before we can statistically view them as, I guess, an example.
That's really important. So I can see how having groups of 10 or less, it can skew the data and also compromise
Yeah.
the confidentiality of the respondents. So I know at Safety Action, we only ever show the results for 10 or more.
Yes.
So what about a small company? Can they still conduct a safety climate survey?
Yeah, they can. So if you look at the back at the table, you can see that, there we've 50 employees, you need 50% to have a statistical sample. And in general, even if you only had 10 staff, you could still survey those 10 staff. You would just only be able to represent just the 10 staff. You wouldn't be able to break it down as the managers thought this and the employees thought that. It would just be, these are our 10, this is where we're sitting. But so long as, you look at this graph and you follow the table and you follow its recommendations for how many people you need to survey. And this is to get a statistical valid sample, this is.
Thanks, Katie. And now I know you've conducted a lot of safety climate surveys over many years. Do you have any interesting findings that you can tell us about?
Yeah. So there's always some interesting things that pop up when you do surveys. I kept mentioning whether managers say something and workers say something. So I think it's quite common in climate surveys to see differing in responses from managers to employees. Probably the most common thing we find is that managers tend to be more aware of the safety system and so are more likely to rate it higher. So when we're looking at the operational safety category, managers will rate higher that category, whereas workers are sometimes less aware of the safety system and exactly what's happening in the system, but they do rate people higher. So their peer influence category will be higher because they believe in their team and they believe in the staff around them and the people that they work with. And so workers rate people higher, managers rate a system higher. We also often see that office-based staff are commonly less aware of safety. So again, a lot of those operational safety things, they just don't know if they happen. So often, if you ask them, are safety inspections conducted regularly? Their answer is, it's I don't know or no. So yeah, office-based staff. So that can either lead to them office-based staff being less aware of safety, or at least less aware of what's happening in safety, can either mean that they answer no and are more negative, or they answer yes. But what we do find is that when you talk to people within the business, it'll be consistent. So either all of them answer no because they're aware enough that it should happen that they'll answer no, or they have less awareness on safety and they answer yes because what they respond to us saying is, I'm sure it's conducted. So they believe that it happens whether it does or not. Um, and probably the last common finding that we get is that we used to often ask a question, do you individually follow safety procedures? And we would get like 90% of people would say yes, no matter what business we're in and what department we're in. People would say, yes, they as an individual follow safety procedures. And then you say, do your co-workers follow safety procedures? And they would go, not all the time. So people are taking this stance of, I work safely, but I think sometimes my fellow co-workers may not.
Oh,
So
that's
it's an
funny.
interesting result.
That is interesting, Katie. And you must have a lot of fun doing these surveys.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity to talk to people and find out what they think.
Yes.
Um, something I haven't mentioned yet is, climate surveys. It's really important to remember that they're a snapshot of a business and a snapshot of the people's perception of the business's safety at a point in time. So you can't conduct some surveys, in 1 month and then 5 months later conduct surveys with a different group and think they're comparable. Because it was only a snapshot of the business at that time, so you would have to do the whole business at one time. Otherwise, it's skewed because you'll have started activities and you're viewing things differently.
Of course. And when you conduct the surveys, is it better to do these as a standalone project or a part of a safety review?
Um, part of I think it can kind of depend on the business, but we do find that they work very well done as part of a bigger review, and more commonly businesses are choosing to do climate surveys with us, not just as, oh, we're only doing climate surveys. They go, well, can you come in, audit our system, do detailed interviews with the management team, and we incorporate the results and comparisons from the larger review with the climate survey results. So probably the biggest thing about doing it as part of a bigger review is that when you analyze your climate survey data, you'll be able to go, oh, staff said that we don't do safety inspections, but our safety audit shows that we do safety inspections. So that tells you that staff saying you don't do them, but you do them, it means there's a communication gap and staff aren't seeing it. So whereas if we just did surveys or just did an audit, if we just did an audit, we would go, we're doing inspections, we're great. If we just did surveys, we go, we're not doing, we just did surveys, we go, we're not doing inspections, this is a problem. And then you might try to do more inspections, but you're already doing inspections. The gap is actually that you weren't communicating that you're doing them, or you're not being visually seen whilst you're doing them. So it can be very important to do. So there can be huge benefits in doing safety climate surveys as part of a bigger safety review project.
Oh, of course. And I imagine that then your the outcomes and the action plan can help to address your any safety system deficiencies together with improving the safety climate at the same time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
excellent.
And that's the point of it. And often when we do it as part of a bigger safety review, we do the normal climate, the employee surveys, which is what we've been talking about, but we can also do more in-depth leadership surveys and interviews with the management team and strategic team and the board members. And this helps us understand, so then we can also get, well, what's the strategy of the business and where is the business looking to go with safety? And then we can assess the system and say, is that doing that as well? And then we can, you work down the line and you can compare everything. Is it cohesive? And is the safety vision of the senior management team, is that known and understood by the employees? And so that's the benefit of a bigger review.
Thanks, Katie. That's really interesting. And now, after all this, why and when should a business conduct safety climate surveys?
Um, that's a good question. I guess the main time that a business would start conducting climate surveys is when they go, oh, I want to understand what my business's current level of culture is. So the way that people perceive safety, we view this as a measure of our safety culture. Um, and so I guess you're kind of wanting to know, do our staff know what we're doing for safety? Asked if maybe you've done a recent improvement to safety and want to know, well, did our staff benefit from that improvement? Are they aware of that program we ran? Are there risks we didn't know about? Um, so I guess one of the key things is, also the benefits to a business of doing it. So they need to raise awareness of safety and share the results to the business. Um, Businesses might also want to conduct them so that they can benchmark internally or externally. So if someone was using their survey results to benchmark internally, it means they would then want to do more surveys in a year's time or after the rollout of a big safety initiative or maybe 5 years' time. So what I've actually prepared for you to show you, because I thought you might ask this question. Just trying to get it. There we go. Changes over time. So I said that, one of the reasons we might conduct safety climate surveys is to internally benchmark our own performance. So what I'm showing here is this is the same business 2 years in a row. So in the first year, we did do audits and things as well, but we did the climate surveys, and you can see there's lots and lots and lots of yellow. So their performance was not very good from a cultural point of view. Over the year between the two surveys, they did safety leadership training and updated their safety management system. And so with the rollout of a new safety management training system, so new safety management system, and having done leadership training, you can see that they've now, in the second graph, progressed into almost all green, which is a really, really big change and a really big improvement in a year. So that was a lot of activity on that company's part to do that, to make that transformation.
Right. And so what you're saying, Katie, is that if you do some safety initiative and then conduct the safety climate survey afterwards, you can help to get, I guess, measurement about whether that initiative benefited the safety culture in the business.
Yeah, and especially if you have climate survey results from before the initiative as well. So some businesses like to go, well, we're going to make this big change. So before we do it, we want to make sure, one, we're doing the change for the right reason and focusing on the right things. So let's do a climate survey. And that'll help confirm that, yes, that big thing you're wanting to roll out, it is addressing the issues that people have. And then you make your big change, and then after it's implemented, which would be 6 months to a year before it's completed and fully rolled out and implemented and making a change anyway. And then you would, so then you would do the climate surveys again to see what sort of result you got. So this is an example of a company having done that, where they said, oh, what's our baseline? And then they made changes based on the results of the climate surveys in their audit, and then you can see it made a difference to their business.
Fantastic. Thank you, Katie. That's all been really interesting. That is all we have time for today. So I'd like to thank you again, Katie, for presenting this webinar. To our viewers, if you did not have time to answer your questions today, or if you have further questions, please get in touch. Contact details, we'll send them in an email afterwards. We will send you the slides later also with a survey about this webinar. Your feedback will help us to improve the future webinars. If you'd like to learn more about safety performance measurement, please join us next month for the Benchmarking Safety Performance webinar, and you'll learn about the other safety performance measures, lead and lag indicators that you should be measuring. Stephen will tell you how to compare your organization's performance with others. The Safety Performance Benchmarking webinar is on the 16th of May 2018. And the next coming up webinar is on the 23rd of April, called Contractor Management. Hope you'll join us for this one as well. You can sign up for webinars at our website, safetyaction.com.au. And remember, Safety Action members can attend free webinars. We will be running these on a variety of topics. Ask us how you can become a member. Now, thank you for attending. Have a great day. See you next time. Bye.